My name is Will Oulten. I'm the Director of Responsible Investment at FTSE, which is one of the world's leading index groups. And I'm delighted to be participating in this programme and to share with you the experience of how my career has developed from studying zoology at university in England to now being in the financial services sector, working in the low carbon and socially responsible investment sector. So from a zoologist, I entered the London Stock Exchange, where I worked for 10 years in a variety of roles, from derivatives marketing to developing indexes. And that's where my index work sort of began. At that time, the London Stock Exchange and the Financial Times, which is the leading newspaper in the sector, were both involved in the development of indexes for the UK market, but also for the European and global market. And in 1996, the two owners put the two interests in indices together to create a joint venture company called FTSE International. And my role at FTSE has been as one of the directors of the company, involved in business development and marketing indices all over the world. And for 3 years of that role, I set up and ran the first overseas business of FTSE in the US. So when I was there in 2001, one of my responsibilities was to launch a socially responsible investment index called FTSE for Good. Now, FTSE for Good does not mean it's about selecting good and bad companies. FTSE for Good simply means that all the revenues created from this index is given to the children's charity UNICEF. So it's FTSE, the company, being a good company. So it's not about selecting good and bad companies. And one of the challenges in trying to establish what is good, responsible corporate responsibility practice in companies is being able to set standards and measurement frameworks for that. So one of the things that I've been involved in doing is the creation of standards of good practice on environmental, social, human rights, business ethics and corporate governance factors in companies. Because today, increasingly investors, consumers and other participants in business want to see companies behaving in a responsible way. Today, it just is not acceptable to damage the environment by being business as usual. It's just not today acceptable, where 10, 20 years ago, companies could do that without any real reaction from a range of stakeholders. But also today, for people entering the sort of recruitment and workplace, people do not want to work for companies that behave irresponsibly. They don't want to, they want to work for companies that take care of the environment and the communities they work in. They want to work for companies that respect their employees. So the whole issue of corporate responsibility today is a very important part of the business agenda. And the work I do is about measuring, monitoring and assessing companies all over the world to see whether they do this or not. And if they do, then they get into the FTSE for Good index, which is the index I was involved in the creation of back in 2001. Now, why this is important is also from the investor perspective. Investors see companies that are sustainable, that manage their environmental and social and corporate governance performance and therefore their risks as being good business opportunities. And today, there is one big issue which dominates the environmental agenda above all others, and that's the issue of climate change and the impacts on companies in their future value from climate change. So when you look at sectors like the oil and gas sector, then there's a big risk around climate change, because if governments start to restrict carbon emissions by taxation or other measures, then that's going to affect the value and the business opportunity for companies in the oil, gas and mining sectors in particular, because they produce a lot of CO2 in their normal business activities. But it's not confined just to that sector. There are many others, service industries and other areas such as water technologies, waste and pollution control, that are becoming much more interesting to investors because of the opportunities that these these sectors will create. And today, as we sit in early 2009, we're in a global recession, and governments around the world are creating stimulus packages which have billions of dollars of investment dedicated to the creation of energy, low carbon energy and sustainable energy, but also energy efficiency measures. And all these are associated with the question of climate change and reducing emissions. So what this is doing is it's creating new jobs and new opportunities for graduates coming out of business schools, engineers, because there is globally a shortage of skills in this sector. And this is one of the areas where, again, investors and others in these sectors just see the potential for growth being very high compared to more traditional heavy industrial sectors. So for people coming out of educational establishments and universities and colleges and setting up on a career, there are increasing opportunities in the low carbon economy. So by low carbon economy, what I mean is the renewable energy area, the renewable alternative energy, which today consists of primarily wind power, solar power, some geothermal power in different countries, but also around energy efficiency, so controlling the demand for energy by various technologies. And there's a number of exciting things happening in those areas. Also the issue of consumption. Today we have around 6.5 billion people on our planet. By sort of 2030, that's expected to grow to around 8.5, 9 billion. So these people need feeding, they consume goods and resources, and we have a finite level of resource on the planet. So we can't continue to consume resources and goods to the extent we are today. So the issue of recycling and repackaging and managing waste is becoming much more important than it ever has been. And this again is an area where new technologies are being deployed, and new opportunities for careers and job creation is coming from this area too. So the whole environmental sector is one of the strongest growth areas, and it's a key component of the corporate social responsibility agenda. So when you're looking at business, either from an investor perspective or a potential company to work with or for, then these things are important now, much more important than they've ever been. And I think this is going to continue certainly over the next few decades as we see an increasing tightening and restriction and lowering of the carbon effect in our economies. And the majority of carbon is created from business activities. So it's an important area, and it's an area that I would urge people to look at if they're looking at this whole corporate social responsibility agenda today. Environment is a very key part of that. But that doesn't mean the social side can be ignored. Still, labour standards, employee standards, political issues around human rights in developing countries is still a major topic of conversation and seen as a major risk to companies, particularly companies with high brands. So companies where their brands are very well known in consumer markets work very hard to make sure that they don't have public relations disasters because they find child labour, for example, in their supply chains in developing countries. So today, the corporate social responsibility agenda is evolved very rapidly from 5 to 10 years ago. I see that continuing, and I think that's creating opportunities for responsible businesses to differentiate themselves and be seen by their customers and shareholders and other stakeholders such as governments as models that should be replicated and copied by industry. So in summary, good corporate responsibility is an expectation today, not an exception, which is probably what it was 10 years ago. But also, from an investment perspective, investors want to be invested in companies that show leading, sustainable, responsible business practice, because they're the ones they see as offering superior growth compared to those companies that ignore these issues.